They say that when in Rome, do as the Romans do. But if you are planning an event as massive and historic as a coronation, you'll want to take things one step further. You'll want to think like the Romans. Hi, I'm the host, and this is our channel. And while there have been dozens of coronations throughout history, from ancient Egyptian pharaohs to the last official coronation held in 1953, we've decided to focus on one particular country and recreate every single one of their coronation ceremonies in order. The United Kingdom has a long and illustrious history. The monarchy was established in 927 AD with the crowning of Eggleston. That's right, crowning literally. Since then, there have been 40 official coronations. While many were skipped due to civil war, plague, or the fact that the previous king just happened to be the same person as the previous queen, each coronation was unique in its own way. Now, while we could try to recreate each and every single one, that would take a very, very long time. Not to mention we would need to track down a lot of obscure historical records. For example, where can you even get your hands on a replica of the 13th century Winchester Bible? No, probably not. And it turns out many of these early coronations had more in common with each other than they did with what we think of as the modern coronation ceremony today. So instead of trying to go back and recreate the first 1600 years of British history, we're starting with the year 1603 and working our way to 1953. We'll also be taking a few liberties with the term recreation. After all, we're working with a nearly 500-year-old tradition that was meticulously documented so that nobody would ever make a mistake. So there will definitely be a few inaccuracies to keep things interesting. To set the stage for our first coronation, let's take a look at the state of England in the early 17th century. Elizabeth I died in 1603 without any children, leaving the throne to her cousin James VI of Scotland. Now, don't get confused by the numbering here. Throughout history, monarchs weren't always in power consecutively, so when Elizabeth came to power, the country was considered to be in the year 1558. Then, after a few kings ruled during the next few decades, she was once again at the top of the line. As we mentioned, James VI had been the heir apparent since birth, but he had to wait over 100 years to finally take the throne. He had spent the majority of his life ruling Scotland and was quite fond of Presbyterianism, which was extremely unpopular in England. This caused a bit of tension and raised questions as to whether or not he would convert in order to appease his predominantly Anglican subjects. Ultimately, he did not, and took the throne as both King James I of England and King James VI of Scotland, ruling both countries simultaneously under the first Stuart monarch. While James's ascension to the throne was relatively peaceful, his coronation was about to get very messy. Let's see how it went down. Coronation Day dawned bright and clear, but rain was in the forecast, and there wasn't much that could be done about it. After all, this was 1603 and there were no weather apps to consult. The people of London began to gather around Westminster Abbey as early as 6 a.m., more than 10 hours before the festivities were slated to begin. Vendors sold ale and wine to eager crowds, who were so busy partying that the actual procession passed by unnoticed. Oops! When James I arrived, the crowd finally noticed and cheered as he made his way inside. While the service was being conducted, however, there were rumblings from the gallery. You see, James had promised to maintain Presbyterianism as a state religion in Scotland, but had also been less than clear about what that meant for the Church of England. Some loyalists were worried that he would take away their religion altogether, while others wanted him to go even further and establish Presbyterianism as the only state religion in England. Unfortunately for everyone, none of them knew that James had decided to play his cards close to the chest until the moment he stepped foot into the abbey. As he took his seat, he allowed 2 Scottish bishops to stand beside him, breaking with tradition and causing consternation among the English bishops. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. As James stood up to receive the crown, the 2 Scottish bishops placed the heavy stone on his head. No fanfare, no trumpets, not even a religious figure to conduct the ceremony. It was over in a flash and the crowd was left stunned. Even worse, James refused to accept the royal insignia from the English Archbishop of Canterbury, choosing instead to wear a laurel crown. When he finally got around to delivering his speech, he proclaimed that he intended to rule over all three of his kingdoms fairly and equally. In reality, though, this was simply a ruse to buy time. James had no idea how to govern England. So instead, he turned to his counselors and asked them to write his speech for him. With no real understanding of the political landscape, James ended up alienating both sides of the religious debate. He was forced to flee to Normandy just a few years later, and while he eventually returned, relations between the Scottish and English churches never really recovered. That brings us to the present day. There are still three main branches of Christianity in the UK: the Roman Catholic Church, the Church of England, and the Presbyterian Church of Scotland. So now that we've got the basics down, let's take a look at some of the details we'll be including in our recreation. We'll cover the finer points of each coronation as we go along, but there are some general rules that we'll be following. Firstly, the ceremony itself will be largely unchanged, aside from the bits that were completely unique to each monarch. For example, in 1603, James I had to be convinced to wear the traditional crown at all. We'll be making sure to include that in our recreation. On the other hand, some elements of the coronation will be changed slightly to fit the time period. For example, coroners didn't wear purple robes until the 18th century, so we'll be dressing them in more appropriate clothing. But perhaps the most important change we'll be making is to the guests. Each coronation was attended by a variety of important figures, from dukes and earls to ambassadors from foreign countries. These people played an important role in the ceremony, and their presence lent legitimacy to the new monarch. In our recreation, we'll do our best to accurately portray the court of each king, complete with period-appropriate clothing and behavior. In addition to the guests, we'll also be bringing in some special guests of our own. For example, we may have a historian on hand to provide commentary or an expert on the period to help us better understand the events. We may also bring in some actors to help us recreate some of the more dramatic moments in coronation history. Finally, we'll be making sure to include as many details as possible from each coronation. This includes the music that was played, the decorations that were used, and even the food that was served. With all that in mind, let's return to 1603 and watch the recreation of James I's coronation. The year is 1603. And you are invited to witness the coronation of James I of England. The year before, James had ascended to the throne of England upon the death of Elizabeth I. But today is the day he will finally be crowned in a ceremony held at Westminster Abbey. The morning is crisp and clear with nary a cloud in the sky. A large crowd has gathered outside the Abbey, eager to catch a glimpse of the new king. Among them is a group of courtiers dressed in their finest robes. They are joined by a few members of the clergy, as well as a contingent of soldiers to keep order. As the clock tower chimes 6 a.m., the crowd begins to grow restless. Many are beginning to wonder where the king is and why the ceremony has not yet begun. But suddenly, a hush falls over the crowd as a carriage approaches. It is drawn by 4 white horses and carries the king and his counselors. The crowd cheers as James descends from the carriage and makes his way to the Abbey doors. Inside, the Abbey is richly decorated with banners and flowers. The throne is covered in velvet and ermine, and the coronation ground is strewn with red carpets. The air is thick with incense and the sound of chanting. As James takes his seat, the Archbishop of Canterbury rises to address the congregation. He speaks of the king's lineage and reminds the crowd of the oath he has taken to protect the church. He then asks for the people's support in maintaining peace and order throughout the kingdom. Suddenly, a member of the clergy steps forward and presents the Scottish bishops with a laurel crown. They place it on the king's head and the crowd gasps. The archbishop protests, but the king waves him down. James then addresses the crowd, promising to rule with justice and compassion. He pledges to protect the church and uphold the law and asks for the people's blessing as he begins his reign. The crowd cheers, and the coronation is over. So how did we do? Do you think we captured the spirit of James I's coronation? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. We hope you learned something new, and we can't wait to bring you more videos in the future. Thanks for watching.